The iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max is superior to the iPhone 13 and 13 mini in almost all the areas a pro user values. Better build quality, display, battery life, and even a better camera system. On paper, the numbers don't lie. The Pro devices are overall greater, but in reality, experiences are everything, and that's how I'm going to approach this review. I want to give you guys a little bit of some context before I fully get into this review. So prior to the iPhone 13 Pro Max as a daily driver, I actually used the iPhone 12. Before the iPhone 12, I had the iPhone XR. Before the XR, I had the iPhone 8. None of them were Pro devices or even one of the Max devices in the entire iPhone lineup. So this is my very first experience with an iPhone Pro device on top of it being an iPhone Pro Max device. So that's how I'm going to practically approach this review from that perspective. Prior to actually picking up the 13 Pro Max, I was always curious or skeptical about the Max series because I knew you would get a better experience because they always had better cameras, better displays, but the size of it is what really kind of deterred me from picking up the Max devices. I thought it would be too big and too uncomfortable. But now that I've had this phone for over a month now, this is the perfect device for me. The iPhone 13 Pro Max has the best battery life on any phone I've ever used, period. It actually made me realize how much I really value having a great battery life and how much I really don't care about sacrificing the size and the overall usability for a much, much better battery life. And I no longer have the anxiety of having to charge my phone at night. Anyway, on a heavy day, I'm averaging at least 8 hours of on-screen with about 30% of battery life left. That means I'm scrolling through social media a lot. I'm watching a lot of content on YouTube and Netflix, and even streaming music the vast majority of the day. I don't game much on my device, but I'd say the most intensive task that I do is creating graphics, maybe on Spark Post or Canva, or watching just a ton of Netflix series and doing a bunch of binge watching. So days like that is when I had about 30% of battery life left. When I'm just using my phone for phone calls, messaging, a little bit of web browsing and social media use here and there, I'm gonna average at least 50% to 60% of battery life at the end of the day. Now, the best day I've had on this device was more of a lighter day. I had this device last me well over 10 hours of on-screen, and even the other day I had almost 11 hours of on-screen, which is pretty amazing. In terms of the hardware, it's practically the same exact device that we saw last year, but there are a few changes that most individuals are probably not going to notice. The first one is on the back of this device. We thought last year's camera system on the Pro devices were big. Wait until you see this year's. Another slight change is a notch. It's slightly smaller, but it's still there at the end of the day. Some may argue it's what Apple uses to stand out from other devices, or Apple is just pure out crazy for still including a notch in 2021. I sit somewhere in the middle. Now, the least noticeable difference is the size. Apple is finally going against the trend of making their devices thinner and thinner each year. The 13 Pro and Pro Max are now slightly thicker and heavier. This will be noticeable if you're upgrading from the 12 Pro or Pro Max. Apple is actually listening to us because a lot of us don't really mind having a thicker device and in return, a bigger battery. Looking around the device, you still have that surgical grade stainless steel frame, which is still a huge fingerprint magnet. I'm honestly not a fan of it. It does look nice, but after you hold the device, it's pretty ugly. You'll find volume buttons on the left side with the mute switch. On the right side is a power button, and on the bottom is a lightning port, microphone, and speaker. Now, speaking of the speakers, you see what I did there. Anyway, this paired up with the earpiece to provide a stereo experience. I have to say, this is definitely one of the best speakers I've heard on any phone. I found myself using this over the 8th Gen iPad for content consumption more, just because of the speakers. And every now and then, I will bump to music without any earphones, which I rarely do. Speaking of music, A lot of you guys ask me, Vic, where do you find your music from? And I'm excited to partner up with Epidemic Sound to show you exactly where I find my music. In fact, I've been using them for the past year, so all the songs that you've heard on my recent videos are from the Epidemic Sound music library, which gives you full access to over 35,000 tracks and 90,000 sound effects, which are royalty-free, meaning you don't have to worry about copyright issues or your videos being taken down. When I go looking for music for a video, the first thing I do is check out the feature tab, which suggests music based on the style of music you typically download. If I can't find anything there, then the theme tab is my go-to because it categorizes different tracks depending on the style of video, and it's actually surprisingly accurate. I generally believe that music is a great way to connect with your audience, and that's why I appreciate my Epidemic Sound subscription. Let's move on to the display. Apple has finally listened again because we now have that ProMotion panel this year. 120 Hz definitely gives this device a whole new level of fluidity. From the moment you unlock this phone, you'll notice how smooth it is, especially coming from one of the previous generations. I've asked my friends who've used either the 12 Pro or Pro Max as a daily driver if they could tell the difference and if it was noticeable. And most of them said, yes, they can practically the difference in the clarity of text when scrolling through web pages, and even just putting them side by side to their devices, they can tell a noticeable difference when scrolling through the home screen and on different applications. With that said, this is not a upgrade worthy feature in my opinion, because you're really going to only notice it if you really want to look for it. But on a day-to-day, most people are not going to really care too much about this feature. Anyway, the resolution on the 6.7-inch display is 2778 by 1284. It's brighter with a max peak brightness of 1000 nits for SDR content and 1200 nits for HDR content. This was most noticeable when using this device outside on a sunny day. It's actually pretty impressive how bright it is. Even when consuming HDR content, I can still tell a difference. Specs are not everything, but I'm sure a lot of you guys care about those numbers, especially if you're upgrading from one of the older generation devices. This year we have the new A15 Bionic chip, which features a new 6-core CPU with 2 performance cores and 4 efficient cores. Also a new 5-core GPU and a new 16-core neural engine. If you consider yourself a true pro user and you literally use your phone for everything, whether it be shooting videos, maybe a little bit of editing, sometimes photo editing, of course, social media and web browsing, this device is gonna practically handle everything. Now, in terms of usability, I know a ton of you guys are probably coming from a smaller device and you're probably curious on how it is transitioning from maybe like the 12 mini or the 12 to the 13 Pro Max, which is a much bigger device, especially for coming from a mini iPhone. So here's my opinion on that. Like I said earlier in this video, the first few weeks, I actually got used to the size of this device, but there's still things here and there that kind of aggravate me about the size. This is definitely on the heavier side of things. In fact, it's heavier than last year's Max devices, and it's even thicker. So that didn't even help me upgrading from the iPhone 12. But I'd say the biggest sacrifice is gonna be for like a female. If you're coming from, let's say, a smaller device and you're used to the device fitting in your pockets comfortably, well, that's very unlikely gonna happen with the 13 Pro Max. You're probably gonna either have to carry around a purse or maybe even just carry the phone on your hand most of the day, which can be a little bit aggravating. But if that's something that you're willing to sacrifice for an overall bigger battery life and display, then you're probably going to not mind having this usability problem with the iPhone 13 Pro Max. The main camera has a new sensor, the largest ever put into an iPhone. It has a faster f1.5 aperture lens, which equates to an improved light gathering, and all of that adds up to a camera that can quickly take in a massive amount of light relative to other phones. Combined with some tuning and improvements to Apple's computation photography, the low light performance on the 13 Pro is simply second to none. Everything looks great and has vibrant colors overall. I'm digging the slightly boosted contrast, Sometimes the images from the iPhone 13's main wide camera aren't as sharp compared to the iPhone 12 Pros around the edges, but that's to be expected since the aperture is now faster. It went from f1.5 to f1.6 we saw last year, and that produces a shallower depth of field. There's less image noise in low light and more dynamic range in low and even medium light. Apple has truly adjusted how it handles the black point, so shadows exposures is more accurate now too. The 13 Pro is more willing to let the darks be dark while accurately exposing lighter areas. This is an impressive camera system, and I did an in-depth review, so go check that out. Links will be down in the description. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really think I would like the iPhone 13 Pro Max as much as I do. Coming from a smaller iPhone 12, I had my questions, but after a month of using it, I kind of prefer the larger phone. I don't mind sacrificing usability for an overall better experience. From watching videos on YouTube to binge watching Netflix series, this has somewhat replaced my iPad, and I also didn't realize how much I valued battery life until I had this phone for a month and I didn't have to worry about charging it every single night. Well, that's been my experience with the iPhone 13 Pro Max. I hope you enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing all of you in the next one. Bye.